Everyone. So glad to see you. Make the trek out, make the effort, will pay off. And to you Zoomers out there, welcome as well. Happy to see you. And Brother Eric, happy to see you. Yes. We had a wonderful time. I'm sure you did. We'll hear about it in upcoming Thursday evening conversations. Yeah. My name is Michelle. I share the opportunities to MC with my sister Louise, and this week it's me. And I was a little nervous about it because it's a new topic. It's the month of March, and it's awakening and enlightenment. And I got a chance to speak with our speaker tonight, and he brought up about one of my fears when I was in college was philosophy. It was not my strong suit. And I know we spent some time talking about enlightenment, the number of philosophers that had delved in that. And I always thought of it as a secular discussion. And now I'm understanding that really in this study, it is something that is very spiritual. And thankfully, we have a wonderful speaker tonight who's going to help us with some of the definitions. So I was thinking about awakening and enlightenment. And tonight, the topic is awakening and enlightenment. And I thought how apropos for spring, because what's interesting is this week, I guess I had been asleep. I kind of hibernate during winter. It's cold. I keep my head down, covered up a lot. I commute to the city and I just want to get through the day, which is really not the way to do it sometimes. It's dark. But what I noticed this week, and maybe you noticed in my little backyard, the crocus, right? It's the plural, crocus, croci are coming up. And I was thinking they're awakening. They know what to do. They don't need to be told what to do. They truly understand the essence of who they are in the universe. Year after year, cycle after cycle, they just are. They come up and they bring beauty and they tell us, here comes spring. And this week, we're going to be turning our clocks ahead. So I was thinking, awakening, how awake am I? And I thought about that. And thank you, Tony, for that conversation. It did help me churn a little bit. Was how long have I been awake, if you will? And I found that I was looking and searching even before I joined with the Brahma Kumaris. That awakening is that conversations I had with God started when I was an adult, although I always spoke to God, but it changed and I was more aware of my actions and were they worthy of God? And we studied, I was born tradition of Judaism, the image of God. And what does that mean? And has that changed for me from when I was a youth? Because believe me, it was a very different idea than what I thought God looked like and my image to him versus now what I believe it is. So awakening, enlightenment, awakening is sometimes thought to be a temporary thing. For that one moment, you're awake. But do we stay awake? And is that when enlightenment comes, when we are able to awaken ourselves, but stay awake? Because how many of us, myself included, are awake, notice the difference, and then how soon I forget and slip back into that slumber. And what do I mean by slumber? For me, that slumber is not realizing, like the crocus, what is my place in this world? And it really is to be a spiritual entity, that to let go a little bit more of that body consciousness, that ego, that I am part of a greater thing than myself, that ego has to go. It's really not about me. It is about my connection to everything and everyone and nature, and most especially God. So I want to read what was written about tonight: awakening, understanding who we are spiritually, and enlightenment is determining how we use this consciousness to go hand in hand. In a rare introspective moment, we think about, who are we really? Am I that flower that knows what to do at every moment, in every situation, just am? And what is it that I'm doing? What are we doing? And why? So we're going to explore, and I love this, the Renaissance within ourselves. And I may have some questions for Tony. Who better than definitions and philosophy than Tony? So Tony is an architect and a planner. He deals with solid objects, but ideas as well to build those solid objects. He has worked as a government official and a corporate manager, in addition to managing his own practice, LHP Architects. His work includes stints in Asia and Europe, and he has been a student of Raja Yoga meditation. It's more than 20 years, isn't it? I think I've been reading this 23. That's what I think I've seen 20 for the last 3 years. Okay, so it's 23 years. His involvement with the Brahma Kumaris include facilitating retreats for his professional community. He is very much a part of the professional world, as am I, the worldly, and he tries to bring his knowledge and his love of spirituality to others. He participates in programs to further the understanding of spirituality, and particularly in the professional life. So with that, I offer Tony. Thank you, Brother Tony.
Um, when I saw the subject, I really thought it was an incredibly ambitious task that we had set upon ourselves. And I had to kind of think about what this means, because awakening and enlightenment are actually two different philosophic movements. Awakening is primarily a spiritual religious movement where people were encouraged to get more involved with their own sense of spirituality, their own sense of religion on a personal basis. Whereas religion, for most of the time before the 1700s, was essentially a very structured, formal, societal. And awakening is to get out of that and have people have a direct engagement, direct spiritual engagement that's not really monitored by any kind of institution. My own spiritual awakening in that respect, that's consistent with this particular philosophic a movement, was when I started to read the Bible directly. People who are Catholic basically learn their spiritual values through catechism. Those that are Catholic, familiar with that, which is an interpretation of the scriptures. And as part of my spiritual curiosity, I said, let me actually read the Bible directly. And it was part of my trying to understand the spiritual values that I had grown up with, but didn't really know them. I just knew that they were there. That's what you did this, and this was the nature of how you behaved. And it was very revealing, as the Bible says a whole bunch of things that are nowhere mentioned in the Catholic Church's teachings. And it says a whole bunch of things that are really special. And so it was my own kind of awakening. I had begun to look at different options. So it was, and it's very consistent with what spiritual awakening is supposed to be philosophically. And there have been several waves of this. So I had a kind of a direct experience with that. That was before, obviously, I came to study with the BKs. So it is coming out of a particular state to find out something more about yourself in the context of spiritual values. Now, Enlightenment is another philosophic movement. It's also called the Age of Reason. There was a time, actually, up until the present time, though some people might consider this, we've lost the age of reason right now, but where it was felt that if you were informed and you had a reasonable ethical and moral basis for your actions and your decisions, what you would do would be correct, would be consistent with what is good for society. A great deal was made out of this philosophically, and it is in fact still very strong. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Ethical Culture Society, which is very much based on those principles of understanding, knowledge, ethical values, moral values, and moving forward based on those values, and understanding, being knowledgeable, not doing things, just out of rote, being focused and in using knowledge. So that was the Age of Reason. It is ostensibly what ushered in the scientific revolution into our society in the last 200, 300 years. That's made society as kind of technologically advanced as we are now. So they're two distinct movements, but they're connected in both cases by the fact that there is an underlying value system or value type. In awakening, it's spiritual. In enlightenment, it has to do with being moral and ethical. So there's a kind of a position in both of them. We're doing something that is right, that is consistent with what is supposedly good for the world, good for us, and good for our community, and good for our neighbors. So these are the two disparate movements that we're now trying to connect. So that's kind of where we come to in terms of this two very powerful movements within Western society primarily, though I'm sure that some of this also has resonance in some of the Eastern Asian societies also. So what does this mean to us right now? Does this now, these two different movements, how do they reconcile for us to function in the context that we're in right now? So the first issue is awakening means you're coming out of something that's not conscious. So what does that mean? That means you are beginning to look at something, at the world, at a situation, at a circumstance new. You just got up, facing the day. So critical thing here is that we're looking at something new, different, or differently. The underlying, in almost every case, and every kind of iteration of the awakening movement, the underlying premise was that we were looking at ourselves as spiritual, transcendent. We were not just humans, we were beings. That was the fundamental basis for the whole notion of awakening as a movement. That we were something beyond kind of flesh and blood that we experience. And that the awakening is that we were going beyond that, beyond the flesh and blood, beyond the materiality of our existence. And that leads to many things. It leads to better understanding of yourself, hopefully a better understanding of the people around you. So the awakening is a process by which you begin to try to examine your situation in a way that's different and is transcendent. Now, this is the basis of most religious practices, except that the awakening was we're going to go beyond that. We're not going to be looking just at what is said. How do we respond to it? How do we react to it? What does it do for us? And basically, for us, we feel that awakening has to do with being able to stop, what we call put a full stop to all of the material, all of the dynamic that's going on in any given situation. Stop and then say, okay, where am I in this process? Then the issue of enlightenment is, what do? We have a better understanding. We have a better notion of what we're about. Does that do anything? Does that make our actions any better? And that's where the connection we're looking to make here. The connection with what do you do as you get a better kind of understanding of your situation and the fact that you're something beyond the flesh and bones. Almost every situation that you approach someone, even an atheist, and you say, do you really think that you're just this combination, a bag of bones and blood? And everybody says, no, we're something beyond that. Even the most dedicated, objective atheist, everybody feels that they're something more than their physical reality. And that is really the kind of underlying basis. We all feel that we're more than that. The question is, what exactly is that? We feel that that is who we are, not what we are. In our value system, we have two fundamental rules that we feel should govern our lives. One of them is, do not cause any sorrow. Now, we all understand this. There's no complication, there's no issue. We all know about causing sorrow, either intentionally or by indifference or by insensitivity. We understand. Everybody's aware. But the other part of that formula is, do not take sorrow. Now that's a lot more complicated. For me, that was very difficult to digest. What does that mean? Don't take sorrow. So that's where the whole issue of what you are, who you are, not what you are, comes in. Someone comes and says to you something very hurtful, and you are just this combination of experiences in flesh. That, whatever they said, is going to impact you very deeply, because whatever they're saying, whether it's what you did or the way you are, is what you identify with. So it becomes very difficult to kind of separate yourself from what's being said. Maybe something hurtful. Now, the really critical thing in this is that the person who said that to you, your sister, brother, friend, husband, wife, may have said this something hurtful, but then they went on and they forgot about it. It's no longer an issue for them. They said they got off their chest something that ended up being hurtful to you. Yet, if you do not know how to not take sorrow, you do not know how to identify with this negativity, then a week later, a day later, maybe the same evening, or a month later, you go back to saying, this person said this terrible thing about me. How could they do this? How could they hurt me that way? Meanwhile, that person may have gone on. Doesn't he remember that they said something negative? But you remember because you've identified with that negativity based on what you think you are, not who you are. So it's very hard to be able to make that separation between your material self and your being, your spiritual self. If when you are confronted with circumstances, you're able to be objective and say, okay, this person said that about me. If you are able to be a bit objective, if you're able to be awakened, enlightened, say, okay, let's examine what they said. Not how can they say this terrible thing about me? I am this wonderful, virtuous person. I've helped this person. I've done all these things. That becomes your focus, not what they said. So then it stops being something someone said to them. It becomes your own thing. You have taken that sorrow. You have owned it. You have made it your own. It's now become part of you. Yet, the most critical thing in this process is for you to say, what exactly happened? Not, I don't deserve this. I'm not entitled to this treatment, because that becomes what our basic concern is. It's like driving in the highway and somebody cuts me off. I don't really get very enlightened when that happens. You immediately want to say this person is being very selfish. They're hogging the road. And, you don't, but you don't know if that person is in a hurry, has got an emergency. None of those things cross your mind. You just know that that person is very bad, and they have impinged upon yourself. That's kind of a little example that I'm obviously susceptible to. But the issue is, someone comes and says something to you, and I'm not saying it's not hurtful. I'm not saying that people don't do hurtful things. They do all the time. But if your reaction is to say, how can that happen to me? Then it becomes your hurt. It becomes you're assuming ownership. And we think that is really not the first step you should be looking. First step is, if you are awakened, if you have some sort of sense of yourself as a non-material entity, some spiritual soul, whatever helps you define yourself as transcendent. And all of us feel that way. Very few of us go around saying, oh, I'm just this bag of bones walking around the street and going to work. Nobody feels that way. Everybody thinks they're special. Serial killers in jail think they're special and that they're transcendent. Everybody thinks they're special. For good reason, because in fact we are. So if you take that particular consciousness, which we feel is spiritual consciousness when it gets to its most distilled and purest form, and you use that consciousness to say, What did this person say about me? Then you dissect what they say about you. And you begin to look at what is it that was going on. This person said this about me. So first question is it true? Did I actually do that? Did I actually behave like that? Are those my qualities? Very important, because you have to really be in your kind of highest self to be able to look at that. Then if not all of it is true, which generally is the case, very rarely that someone says something to you negative that's completely true. Okay. Then you say, okay, maybe there was something I did, but it's not completely true. So then you have to examine, well, what is it that, what stage are they in? They're saying this because I'm this way, which I'm clearly not, but maybe there's a problem they have. So you begin to dissect this behavior. And if it's true that you did something that was not appropriate, then you look to say to yourself, maybe that's something I should not repeat in the future. But if you own the insult, you make it your own, whatever lesson was to be learned, that is gone. You're only concerned about the insult to you and how that makes you feel and how you're not entitled to that kind of treatment. And all of these things that we wrap around, our ego wraps around when we hear something negative about ourselves. So the issue is really, how do we meet with some sort of transcendent position, some enlightened position, what we confront in our daily life? And that really is where we're making the connection between awakening and enlightenment. If you are spiritually awake, if you have a sense of yourself as a spiritual being or as a transcendent being, that you're not just flesh and blood, it is that consciousness that you need to use to be able to affect your actions. And here, more importantly, to affect your reactions, which is what is the problem in most of these cases. So you look at the problem with that perspective. If you're looking at the problem with the perspective that I am this person, this, I have these positions and these opinions, values, then you're not ever going to understand what they're telling you. You're going to say, this is an insult. This is a lack of respect, lack of consideration. And it could be, in fact, some of those things, but it's never, ever, always all of those things. There's always something in there for us to be able to understand and move forward. So the whole point of enlightenment is to understand what transpires and how we can move on from there. If it's a sister or a brother or a close friend that says this, it's very important that you resolve this, because it's a relationship that you want to maintain. And if too many of these things don't get resolved in your mind, you keep owning them, then it becomes a basis for some very, very negative and very contentious exchanges that, if we thought about it a little in a particular context, would not be there. So the enlightenment portion of this is, you're conscious that you're something beyond your body, beyond all these habits and routines that make up your behavior. And you're also conscious of the other person saying these things, that they may have their own idiosyncrasy that you need to look into. It doesn't mean that when someone says something like that, it doesn't hurt. I don't want to kind of give the impression that we just walk around saying, okay, whatever they say, I'm not going to react to it. It's going to hurt. This is we're still human. We're not all kind of transcendent beings that have completely overcome all of this. But it cannot hurt more than once. When it hurts a second and a third time, that's on you. The first time you get hurt, you get surprised. That's normal. But if you get hurt by this a bunch of times, then you're bringing that on yourself. You're creating the circumstances in which that situation is creating conflict and trauma. So that is what we mean by don't take sorrow. Now, I'm saying this in a few minutes. It took me more than a few years to figure this out. So, but I think it's very, very important. It is actually one of the first lessons was taught to me a long time ago, 23 years ago, actually in a retreat I was with Eric, and someone made this point, which I thought was very humorous. I made it in a very humorous point. Sister said, someone says something to you and you feel hurt. And then they go away, but you think about, they put this dagger in you and then they go away. And what do? You take the dagger out and you put it back in yourself the next day or the following day. And Sister Dorothy, and as she was going, as she was falling off the chair, saying, "Here, you keep stabbing yourself until you're finally on the floor." It was one of the most important lessons that I think and it took me a long time. It was very humorous the way she said it, but it's a very kind of profound point. So it is really fundamental because you really don't have to tell people too much about not hurting them. We don't have to spend a lot of time explaining that. Most of us pretty much understand. But not letting people hurt you, that's a different kind of effort. And it can only happen if you are awakened. One, you know that you're transcendent, spiritual being. And two, if you're enlightened enough to know that in this context, you have to look at things differently. So the connection between these two movements for us is based on the fact that once you have the consciousness of yourself, someone beyond the body, that comes with an obligation, a responsibility, and an opportunity for you to change the way you deal with the rest of the world, particularly with people. And it's really critical because without that, we really can't move on. We can't get beyond frustrations, beyond certain kinds of relationships. Without that, there's no ability to kind of evolve. We just continue to maintain ourselves in the same routine. The whole notion of awakening is that you're working in a kind of routine. You're in the same job. You're in the same situation. You're in a relation that's constantly going on in a circle that doesn't necessarily make you feel good. You have to get out and think, what is it? What's going on? What is this? And that doesn't happen while you're going around in a circle. That happens when you become conscious of not what you are, but who you are. You're this transcendent being. And like I said, everybody feels this way. Everybody in the world feels this way. Nobody says they're not. No matter how rational or objective or focused exclusively on the material reality, everybody feels that they are special, they are transcendent. We just have to understand what that means and not just say, okay, I'm special because I'm different than everybody else. Nobody's like me, or maybe I did something. No, that's not the reason you're special. You're special and not because somebody else said you're special. The special is because that's the innate quality of our existence. We're special because we are beings, not just humans. We call ourselves human beings. It's very important that we understand the language that we ourselves use. That term did not spring out just by itself. Someone came up with a cute idea and said, this is what we are. It's a term with a lot of meaning. We are human beings. Being part is the one that we have to start really focusing on. The human part we deal with all the time. That's where we live most of the time. But we are human beings. It's a very important distinction. And that's where we need to begin to look at how we act in the world and how we react in the world. So awakening is really only to acknowledge that you are something unique. Not that other people say that you're unique, not that someone gave you a test and said, okay, you got these scores, but that in fact you are a transcendent being. Right? Definition of our species, we're human beings. And secondly, if we are that, and you recognize that, what is the being part of it? We know what the human part of it is. We do that all the time. And for us, that connection between that being part and what we do, not how we react as humans, but how do we act as beings. That's the connection between awakening and enlightenment. Because if your behavior is informed by this consciousness, you're going to be doing things very different than you're doing it normally. You're going to be conscious of other people having these qualities. So these two great movements that have humongous impact on our Western society, we feel represent the connection necessary for us to live our lives, our everyday lives. And to use that to be able to bring ourselves to a level of our actual potential. I didn't give you a chance to ask questions, did I? I told you to ask questions in the middle of this, but you didn't. So we need to stop, be conscious of the being part. We need to stop, pause, and say, okay, what does this mean? And when we do that, all of these issues begin to kind of unfold. And it makes it possible for us to be able to truly, truly connect with someone else in a way that makes it constructive and makes it understanding. So ultimately, this whole process is to take ourselves outside of the material world in which we live and begin to look at ourselves on a perspective that says, okay, who exactly are we? Are we this person? Are we wife, husband, mother, daughter, employee, employer? Is that who we are? Is that who we are? Or is who we are is a person that's loving, standing, accepting, that has these qualities. Those are the qualities of who you are. Those are what makes you the person that you are, as opposed to what you do. Because what you do is can change from move from one place to another. So what you do is completely different. But who you are is always, those are the qualities we need to cultivate. Sure.
I don't know if you want to take questions, but I had.
Yes, yes. Absolutely.
Well, my question is and I thank you. To manage what's important is the definitions. And again, definitions are in the eye of the beholder too. Every definition is filtered through that individual's understanding, if you will. But I was wondering of the relationship between awakening and enlightenment as terms and as understandings. I like the way you had tied them together, but what I was wondering was from a temporal part, that if this is a pathway, if spirituality is a runway, if you will, to get to that spirituality, is awakening the beginning, and as it grows and ascends, if you will, because it's ascendant. I use the term ascendant, transcendent, you're going higher. Is enlightenment related that the more you ascend, then you become enlightenment? And I understand that enlightenment is your behavior, the more behavior, and that's another question I had, but sticking with this line, that the awakening is the beginning. And oftentimes for myself, it's a beginning, and I think I've got it. And then I close up again and go back to sleep, and then I awaken and it's a beginning again, that it's not sustained necessarily. But if it was sustained, as you describe, and your behavior and your actions take place, that the enlightenment is ascending, and ultimately you will be, whatever that term is, enlightened being, that you will be to that ascension. I know, the only time I heard about enlightenment is the Buddha is enlightenment, but it takes a long time. I always think that it's not easier, but more attainable being a Brahma Kumari than a Buddhist. But do you see what I'm saying? That temporally, that the enlightenment is the kind of the middle and the end of that spiritual runway. Does that make sense?
That's what we're trying to promote here, but awakening is always the beginning. Awakening is always the beginning. So that is the case. That's the starting point. That's a full stop. When you're saying, okay, this is the point where I'm trying to understand something, trying to look at something. So it's always the beginning. And in all of the iterations of awakening as a spiritual philosophical movement, it's always been spiritual, it's always been religious. Enlightenment was actually not religious at all, not spiritual. Enlightenment, the age of reason, the age of Descartes was like, we through knowledge can control the universe. But the assumption was that the knowledge is moral and ethically good knowledge, which we have understood is not really the case in most cases. But so enlightenment is a separate movement. It's not a spiritual movement. It was never a spiritual movement, except under the Buddhist philosophy. Because for Buddha, enlightenment was when your transcendent understanding of yourself and your environment brought you to a kind of very elevated state of consciousness. So in Buddhism, awakening and enlightenment are a kind of continuum. That's kind of the one, that's kind of, in some ways, that's kind of what we're saying here. Whereas enlightenment is a very different concept. It's not a spiritual concept, it's an ethical concept, and it's a concept of knowledge and reasoning. And that if we have everything organized properly, it was a kind of a term during the Enlightenment and during the Age of Reason was that if we could mathematically know the momentum, the location, the mass of everything in the universe, mathematically, we will be God. We would know. We would know. We were able to predict the future. We were able to understand that was part of the Age of Reason, the Age of Enlightenment, which was not a spiritual, but it was and supposedly that you could understand the universe through knowledge, through the Cartesian model, which says, this is the way the universe is organized. They're two different things. I, in this context, feel that the awakening and enlightenment should be a continuum. It should be the beginning, and then enlightenment is taking this knowledge, this understanding that you get, and using it. Always remembering where it comes from yourself as a transcendent, as a being, not necessarily as a physical person, not in the Age of Reason context where everything is defined by some sort of, rational model, mathematical model. So that there is the connection we're making is a connection that we're saying that your rational behavior should be informed by your spiritual understanding of yourself. And it is a connection made by Buddhists. I think that's the only movement I know where enlightenment is that it's connected with that.
Is that, the living?
Yes.
The living,
yes,
is that
yes,
kind
yes.
of in your
They
estimation?
would,
an equa-
the people from the
equation?
Age of Reason will say that their behavior is the ultimate action that you could do on the earth.
Comments or questions? It's a very, as I was telling up there, but it's a very esoteric, but very profound and important subject.
Be awakened at many different levels, many different times, or just one awakening?
No, it's a very, very complex process. That's a very good question. Very good question. Unless you're kind of a super being, you awake your consciousness of yourself at various levels. Doesn't happen like in an instant. Awakening is not exactly like faith. Faith is something that you have, but you don't have. Okay, with faith, you have faith or you don't. It's kind of a decision you make. Awakening is basically, what exactly is it that I am beyond this material definition of myself? And it could be various levels. You have emotions, so that becomes part of the awakening. You have physical aspects to your existence that you might want to kind of stop to think about. It can be a very complex process. But the one thing that is important is that it's all going towards one goal, to understand yourself outside of the material environment that you're in. But it's not, doesn't happen kind of just in one spot, in one moment. It takes effort. But it's also something that you have to kind of say, okay, I'm not thinking in this context. The whole point is awakening is I'm looking at something that is different. Not what I'm seeing now. I'm looking at something that's different. I'm looking at the being, not the human. Human is very attractive, like we're very attached to it, want to hang out with it. Some of us, very, very into it, but that's not awakening. That's just where we are.
Tony, is awakening experiential as opposed to faith sometimes can be, and I'm sorry, I'm not articulating this correct, taught. Like you talk about catechism, I talked in Judaism, you learn different prayers and you say, oh, I have faith, I believe in God. But I was taught that as opposed to me, and again, this is my estimation, that awakening is experiential, that there's something that happens to you inside that you don't have to read about it. You're not going to hear about it. It is internalized in such a way that you almost feel the shift physiologically. It can be in yourself. I've had that. I've had moments of awakening where that connection is so strong that it cannot, it's almost like a power, you cannot explain it in natural physical terms.
I-
Does that make sense too, that
Yeah,
awakening
I
is
think,
experience?
I think, let me use an expression written down. Awakening is willing yourself to live as opposed to willing yourself to exist. Okay? I want to make that distinction. Awakening is an act that you have to do. It doesn't happen to you. It doesn't come to you. It's something that you do. It's an effort you have to make. But we make lots of efforts. Effort to get up in the morning, effort to deal with all our issues. But when you distinguish between, and I'd like to use this analogy, the effort to live versus the effort to exist. That's something that we can appreciate. We will ourselves make the effort to live, which means to experience, like you're saying, experientially, as opposed to willing ourselves just to survive, just to get through the day, just get through. Those are the two distinctions that we need to make when we're talking about this. That's an experiential, because willing ourselves to exist is also an experience. But going beyond that, that's a part of the experience that awakening refers to. Beyond what's conscious, beyond what's just existing. It's being live, living.
Anyone?
Let them think about it a little bit. Okay, yeah, it's an interesting thing. She asked, what is exactly does it mean, human being mean? What is that? What is that? How is that term defined in the context of what we're talking about? Human being implies that there is an entity, a human, a hominid, whatever the scientific definition is, and that entity is being, is self-aware, is sentient. So the technical scientific is a sentient human, sentient hominid. Humans, they're other species, but that's the way it's defined. So human being means a sentient, someone that knows they exist, which is a very significant term. So human defines what we are in terms of our how we exist. We're born, we die, we have all these dynamic social interactions that we are engaging most of our existence. These are the things that are uniquely human. Then we have something that's very special to our species. We have something called altruism. We're capable of doing something to benefit someone else, which does not benefit us. It's a very special quality that we have. That quality that we are able to help other people, help another person, another soul, without expecting anything in return. That is a part of the being. We helping someone that will benefit us, helping someone that we know may help us. Being cooperative in a society is a rational thing. It is through society, through the creation of communities, that we became the civilization that we are. So that's a rational thing. It's normal. It's a way. It works. That's the way it works. That's an age of reason phenomenon. However, helping someone selflessly without expecting any help in return, that's a unique quality that we have. You don't find that too often in the animal kingdom. I mean, mothers, parents of cubs, and they are careful, they take care of them, but helping another animal, sometimes at your own peril, without expecting anything in return, that's very much us. It's very much human beings. That's the being part of us. That we have altruism. It's a very famous quote from a Indian Swami named Vivekananda, who was one of the fathers of modern Hindu spirituality, and he said, the atheist who helps his fellow man without expecting any kind of return, altruistically, is closer to God than the devout person who does not. And I've always thought that was a wonderful quote, because it's basically saying is that God is not letting any good person go by. He's catching everybody who's going to be like that, who's going to have that kind of quality. And I think that's a very important quote, because it really defines what makes us divine, is the ability for us to actually say, I'm going to help this person because they need help, not because they can help us, not because helping them will help us, but because they need help. And we may never see that person again. That kind of altruism is something that's unique to us. And that's part of being. That's the being part of it. Whereas a human part of it, I'll help her because she's my neighbor and we need to do things together, and I help. So that's normal. That's not a bad thing. It's just normal. That's the way things are. What makes us transcendent is to do it when there is no benefit, there is no gain, no expectation, just because someone needs help and we perceive that. And that's really very special, and it's very unique to human beings.
So the hour's getting late. So yeah, it's just about
Past their
can you
bedtime.
do a yes? Can you do a brief meditation commentary? Thank you. Thank you, Tony. It's great.
We are still sensing the vibrations of life pulsing through our body. making us keenly aware of the life force that moves us. We focus on the center of this energy, pulses our body. Imagine it shifting slowly, deliberately, away and up from us. And as it moves away, we sense calming of that energy. And the projection of our consciousness away from the vibrating body, moving us to a place of stillness, quiet, a point that is beyond us, but still connects to our bodies, calming, stilling it, but at the same time, shedding that consciousness of the body, and feeling that point that focus at the center of our own personal universe. And sensing it will take us. where we want to be. Shanti.
Thank you, Brother Tony, for a very thoughtful and insightful conversation, hence the name of our Thursday night meetings. So we are continuing next week with kind of what we're talking about now, picking up the mantle on the spiritual renaissance. And other Eric, maybe will be placed in that hand. We'll be doing maybe double duty next week. I don't know if that's possible, but anyone could do it. Look forward to that. A couple of quick announcements. On Sunday, we are having our celebration, the auspicious day of Shivratri. That is for the public on Sunday, March 10th, right here at 3 to 5 o'clock. And hope you will join us for that beautiful celebration. In addition, there is a beginner course, an online course on Raja meditation, begins on Monday, March 18th. It's Monday through Friday, 18th, 19th, 20, 21, 22, 5:15 to 6:15. And you can call here, or there is registration. You can sign up as well online. And we will see you next week. And please stay for the Toli and your blessing. And thank you again for being tonight. Om Shanti.